One of the things that we were talking about at the meetup in Phoenix a couple weeks ago was how you're lobbying your local government to add Bitcoin to the balance sheet. Why would that be beneficial for governments to have Bitcoin on their balance sheet?
So, we have two things that are happening. The same things that are happening at a kind of retail and consumer level of over leveraged debt, um, wages stagnating while goods and hard assets, investable assets are increasing. That's the same thing as affecting government, city, especially local governments. They don't have control of the money printer. They are a another customer in this whole context where they're on the hook for massive pensions that they already cannot pay. They are on the hook for providing actual real services that are already not doing a great job and has a very bleak outlook on where that's coming, because you look at your own base of people and your tax base is probably shrinking, um, uh, and your ability to control that is very small. And so for for the idea of inflation at that kind of level is a massive issue for these companies. You look at a lot of the corporate treasury movement in Bitcoin is very related to why the hell city governments, local governments should also do this. They're sitting on a bunch of cash. They also need to set themselves up not for just the next quarter of being a sustainable business or a sustainable government, but for the next century. How do you do that? And Bitcoin is probably the only asset that provides even an inkling to that, besides maybe discovering oil underneath your town. Maybe potentially would be something that's just like that. But um, for them, it's a wonderful, and when you think about the risk and reward possibilities, it's, again, the 1% allocation, 5% allocation could have tremendous effect on turning a small, like a county like mine, which is very criminally underfunded. The tax base is very distributed and is constantly constantly being eroded, while at the same time they're trying to raise taxes. Instead of playing that game, Bitcoin provides a way that you don't have to raise taxes and potentially keep up the same value of services that you're already providing your people that live in your town.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. It seems like, when I talk to my local government officials, that they have no interest or understanding of Bitcoin. It's a big roadblock. And I ask them what their plans for the inevitable inflation that we're currently experiencing and will continue to experiencing are, and it doesn't seem like they have it. One of the things that blows my mind is what we're starting to see, um, his local governments reaching out to the Federal Reserve and the federal government for lending and bailouts, which is just absolutely insane to me because that's a complete um, that's just like increased centralization, and that breaks down our government or our governance models, of the government really being for the people, and rather it creates this political nightmare, where their funding is dictated by these central controllers. And yeah, why do you think there's such a disconnect for some of these, local politicians, and seeing the importance of something like Bitcoin and even understanding inflation?
Well, number one, I think, politicians, that's not what they've been thinking about. A lot of these politicians got there to do some very specific local thing that they wanted to change for their town. They're not looking at, macroeconomists, or they're not actively, this is not something that's actively on their mind that they've sought out. Because at the same time, the ideas of coming inflation, all this, up until maybe this year, were actively hidden from it, from average people. The idea of inflation even happening, it was would be constantly called out in, joking op-eds of, oh, look at CPI index. There's no change. There's no inflation. It's this like weird gaslighting moment where we're all affected by this, where we're told that it's not a thing, and even the measures that are there supposed to measure the thing are doing a really poor job at measuring the thing, and actively any part of the data points that start to move it to show some inflation, they then remove that from the calculation. So it's all shrouded in mirrors, and we're actually really, there's a concerted effort to keep that out of sight for everyone. So just at the most basic layer, most people, it's not on everyone's mind. It really was only until this year when the money printers started getting fired up again, and now you actually have the Federal Reserve actually talking about inflation, like saying that it will happen, but don't worry, it's just the right amount. It's the good kind of inflation. But this is the first time they're actually talking about it, and when they are actually talking about it, means that that's the canary. That's not even the canary in the coal mine. We're already breathing the noxious gas at that point. So so for local politicians, something that just number one wasn't on their mind. Again, a 2-year cycles makes them in a position to not think long term anyway. The good thing though about city government is that ideally and hopefully you are living in your jurisdiction, so you have more of a long-term approach to what you're doing in city government than maybe you would at the federal level. But I think your point that you raised right there is that it doesn't matter how much the Constitution talks about decentralizing power between states in the U.S. and even the various houses of government. It doesn't matter if the money is centralized. It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, that will trump everything. And a lot of the problems that we're constantly facing is a mismatch on, wait, we should be independent, decentralized, and we should have these rights as a state or as a person, but it doesn't feel like we have that. And the reason why it doesn't feel like we have that is because value isn't decentralized. Only the idea of value, or only the idea of decentralization is there, but there's no teeth in it to keep it decentralized. And so the very thing that you talk about for a local government to have a portion or a large portion of their treasury allocated to value that cannot be debased or used against them from a federal entity or a more centralized entity, which is Bitcoin, is extremely powerful for maintaining independence, for doing what is right for your local people, and what I think is keeping the Constitution intact is actually what it's really doing. And so I haven't really thought of it in that same framing that you brought up, but I think it's genius.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredibly important. One of the things that you brought up is that the wealth is not decentralized. It's growing ever more centralized, and I think that's the sole job of the the central bank is to slowly take wealth away from the masses and funnel it into the hands of the few. And it's also, a tool that's used to centralize power and control, and we've seen that happen um, over the last almost 100 years since or what, 110 years since its inception. Um, yeah, 110. Just want to make sure got my math right. But yeah, we've seen that happen, and it's this kind of incrementalist way to go about things to central power and control. It's not like it's a coup overnight, but it's just like slow erosion. I think that's something that's so important in our society for people to understand that wealth is speech, and if you don't have it, you don't have a voice. And that looks like going and buying products from companies that you believe in that aren't, awful and doing these things, or funding political candidates, or even probably one of the most ones is like asset protection. So when the government comes and tries to steal your money, you have the ability to mitigate their theft. And then legal defenses in case you get in trouble. It's a huge one. If you don't have money, you don't have access to those things in the same way. And there's no counterbalance.